provides everything.
Mm-hmm.
He provides everything for us. He sees to our needs, and he just knows all the time what we're doing, what we're thinking, what we're living, what we're worried about, what we don't worry about,
Mm-hmm.
and that we don't need to worry.
That's
He
right.
does it all for us.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Do you remember the parable that he told about the rich fool? What did that rich guy do in the parable?
He made bigger storage bins because he had so much stuff, so much wheat or crops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And why was that really
And then he
foolish?
died.
Yeah, because he died. That's right.
And he wasn't sharing any of it.
Yeah.
I mean, he had this surplus, but
It's like,
it's like, I know mine.
As if you could hoard enough stuff to protect yourself from whatever will come. Well, there, to a certain extent, you can use what you have to protect yourself, but you can't protect yourself from God.
No.
And that seems to be what the guy is doing, is just assuming he doesn't need to think about God as long as he's got enough in his storehouses. He's safe. And then God says, well, that's enough of that. And so it's just foolish to put your trust in those things because you can lose them in a snap. And so, well, why is Jesus telling these things? I mean, then he goes on to talk about the flowers and the birds and says to his disciples, don't worry, seek the kingdom. Why is he making an issue of this with his disciples? Why do they need to think about these things?
They're going to be facing they're going out to witness, and he doesn't want them worrying about their next meal. He wants them to be worrying about things of his kingdom and communicating that.
That's right. They need to take hold of the fact that they have a Father who will care for them in order to have the freedom to do what God wants them to do. And are we not the same? I mean, we're not the 12 disciples, but we're in the same situation in the sense of our first priority should be to seek the kingdom. Well, if your first priority is to seek the kingdom, that might sound risky because you're not going to be running after the stuff that the world runs after, but Jesus says you don't have to because you have a Father who takes care of that. So you have the freedom to not worry about what the world does. Prioritize the things that matter the most, which are eternal.
And is it not idolatry when we do that?
When we run after the stuff the world does, yeah, it is.
It can be.
They're going to be persecuted for following Christ. And so,
And they're going to lose a lot. I mean, the disciples are, these particular men that he's talking to, they're going to pay a high price for being part of the inner circle of Jesus. It's going to be worth it, but it's going to be costly. And I think Jesus he's already setting them up for what's coming in the book of Acts to say, okay, where are your priorities? You have to get this sorted if you're going to seek his kingdom and serve his purposes. And not just them, all of us, but they are in a particular situation where they are going to face persecution and difficult circumstances. And God can handle it. Okay, anything else you want to mention from last week?
well, fearing God should be your ultimate, not what man's going to do to you, what you're going to do to the outlook.
That's right. Because again, they're going to face persecution and difficulty, and most of them are going to get executed. But, you know, you can spend your life fearing that, or you can fear God, which displaces all of the other fears. Number two, his mention of the Holy Spirit, that when you might be afraid of what am I going to say, and how am I going to defend myself, and how's it going to go when I get put on the spot like that. And Jesus says, don't worry about that. The Spirit will take care of that. Just be faithful with what you have and trust God to take care of it. Okay, now, this section we're going to look at today carries on the teaching that began in the first part of the chapter, but now with a focus on that theme of the kingdom of God. That's where he was going at the end of last week, was seeking the kingdom. And now, having turned his face toward Jerusalem, Jesus is going to talk more about future things. He's going to prepare his followers for the time after he ascends and before he returns. So he's just told the disciples to seek the kingdom. He's told them that the Father's been pleased to give them the kingdom. Now he's going to tell them to expect the kingdom, and that's significant because the very nature of the kingdom is that its arrival is going to be unexpected. So we're going to see Jesus emphasize throughout this passage the certainty that the kingdom is coming, but the uncertainty about the timing. Okay, so let's look at Luke chapter 12, verses 35 to 59. Be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning, like men waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. I tell you the truth, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the second or third watch of the night. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Peter asked, Lord, are you telling this parable to us or to everyone? The Lord answered, Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whom the master finds doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, My master is taking a long time in coming. And he then begins to beat the men servants and maid servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. That servant who knows his master's will and does not get ready or does not do what his master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it is completed. Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He said to the crowd, When you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, It's going to rain, and it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, It's going to be hot, and it is. Hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time? Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? As you are going with your adversary to the magistrate, try hard to be reconciled to him on the way, or he may drag you off to the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Okay, so how does Jesus begin this next section, verses 35 to 38?
Be ready to go. I'm prepared for what they're about to do.
So what's the parable that he gives? What's this illustration he uses right now?
Be dressed and ready, and keep your lamps burning. Keep your, like you're waiting for something, be ready for that.
Right, what's the picture in the household that he's describing right here?
Wedding.
So there's a master who's gone away to a wedding banquet, right? Who's left at home?
The servant.
Okay, now it's important it's the servants, it's not the neighbors, it's the servants. Because whether or not you get in your PJs and turn off the lights and go to sleep depends on your relationship to the owner of the house, right? So here's this master who's gone away to a wedding dinner, and you know wedding dinners, they can go on for a really long time, right? Well into the night, maybe even the early morning hours. So without knowing the schedule and how long it's going to be until the master returns, what do the servants do? They don't crawl into bed and go to sleep. They stay up, and they not only stay up, they keep the lights on, and they are dressed, and they are watching, and they are ready to work. And then whenever the master returns, whether it's the middle of the night or even at dawn the next morning, they're going to be ready. And when he returns, what will happen in verse 37?
He'll wait on them.
That's astonishing. That verse right there, that's amazing. Yet the servants whom the pastor finds watching and ready, he changes into his work clothes. He has them sit down at the table, and then he himself serves them a meal. Now, what just happened right there?
That's not usual.
No. What do you think? I mean, what's Jesus getting at right here? He doesn't identify himself as the master in the parable, but that's the only way that verse 37 actually makes sense. What do you think he's getting at right here?
Future time to come.
Say that again.
A future time to come.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, big picture, when he has left and he's coming back, but for them, he's still preparing them for the things to come.
That's right. And for the servants of Jesus, them and us, we have no idea how long the wait will be, right? Because his second coming hasn't been marked down on a schedule somewhere. I mean, you might think that it is based on all the garbage that goes on the internet where they're telling you. I mean, I read something this morning about this one guy. He made this comment, I've missed so many raptures already. I mean, that kind of idea, like there's just constantly somebody saying, oh, it's going to be this day, that year, what? No, we have no idea when it's going to be, and Jesus has made that very clear.
Well, I did think the rapture came last Saturday when I came to church.
That was funny.
Yeah.
You were like, yeah. So, without knowing how long it will be until Jesus returns, stay awake, be watchful, be alert. And then no matter when he comes back, you'll be ready to receive
Try to
it.
forward it to you.
And for those who he finds watching and ready, he will have them sit down
Yeah.
to a meal, and Jesus himself will serve them.
I'll
That
try
sounds
If that
to
doesn't
me
work, then I'll
an
call you.
awful lot like the wedding feast of the Lamb. I mean, doesn't that sound like the ultimate banquet that's coming later? Who's going to serve you?
Jesus.
I always had this picture that angels were the ones serving. Maybe they will. But what the parable says is Jesus is going to serve us.
They'll be the bus boys.
That's right. That's an astonishing thing to think that you will spend your lifetime being a servant of Jesus. And if you are faithful to him, he will then turn around and serve you at the banquet that's coming. Now, this first parable, it's like an introduction to the rest of the passage because Luke's emphasis throughout this whole section is on, first, the certainty of Jesus' return, and second, the uncertainty of its timing. So we're already getting that idea in this parable, and that's going to continue in what comes next. Now, what's the second illustration that he adds then in verses 39 and 40?
That if the owner had known when the thief was coming to break into his house, he would have been ready, and they are to be likewise ready for Jesus when he comes.
Right. So we still have this image of a household, but the focus changes right here. Now it's not the master whose arrival you have to anticipate, but the thief. Now the point of the comparison is not between Jesus and somebody who steals, but between Jesus and someone who arrives unexpectedly. So believers must guard themselves from being overtaken by complacency, even if Jesus delayed, if his coming is delayed more than 2,000 years. And here we are. Don't become complacent. The coming of a thief is unpredictable, and the coming of the Son of Man is unpredictable as well. Okay, now what does Peter ask in verse 41?
Are you telling us this, or is this for everybody?
Yeah, is this for the 12 or the public in general? Who's Jesus talking to? And that's a reasonable question, I think. But maybe the ambiguity is intentional. Of course he's talking to his disciples, but everybody who's there needs to hear what he's saying. There's a kind of universal audience that's invited to hear the instruction of Jesus. And so maybe that's why his answer is not, he doesn't directly answer what Peter asks right here. He answers with a rhetorical question. That said, however, I think the parable that comes next has specific relevance for people who are in positions of leadership or authority among God's people, including the 12, but not limited to them. So what does Jesus say in verses 42 to 44?
Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time?
So here's this picture of a servant or a slave who's given the task of caring for the other servants in a household while the master is away. He's been given a certain amount of responsibility and authority, and specifically to make sure that the other servants in the house get fed when they're supposed to. Now, what will a wise and faithful servant do? He'll fulfill his task even without having somebody there to keep an eye on him. And when the master returns and finds him doing what he's supposed to do, his trustworthiness will result in him being entrusted with more. Now, what's the contrast to that in 45 and 46?
I'm in charge and it's party time.
Party time for me,
me.
right? Not party time for everybody else, just for, this guy. He's the opposite of wise and faithful. When he sees the master taking a long time returning, not only does he fail to fulfill his responsibilities, he actually abuses his position. Because now he's beating the other servants, he's whining and dining himself, he's getting drunk. Here's a servant with no integrity, because without the threat of immediate punishment hanging over his head, he won't do what he's been told to do. Now, I think Jesus right here is saying, make no mistake, the master will return. And he will come on an unexpected day at an hour when the servant is caught completely unaware. And what will be the result? There'll be a little slap on the wrist.
A little more than that. Go ahead.
It's curtains, right?
Yeah, it's gonna kill him.
Yes, what he describes right here is a severe punishment that exceeds even physical death. Because you notice that he says he'll cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers or the unfaithful. When I first read that last sentence in verse 46, I thought, how can you assign a place with the unfaithful after he's been executed? Well, who is it who's saying this? And he owns the eternal punishment too, right? So if we're talking about Jesus and he's got power on both sides of the grave, this is the severest punishment there is. It's not just physical death, but it's eternal punishment as well. This warning is serious, and I don't think this parable is limited to the 12, but there's a particular emphasis on the accountability of people who are given the responsibility of leading and looking after God's people. It makes me think of how perilous it is for the religious leaders of Jesus' day, who are actually mistreating the people of God. They're supposed to be shepherding the people of God, but they're exploiting and abusing them instead. And that's a serious thing. But it's not just the leaders in Jesus' day, because I can think of church leaders in our own day who do the same kind of thing. In fact, when I was preparing this, which is a couple of months ago, I remember watching a podcast about a guy who put himself forward as a prophet. And what people didn't know was that he was going on Facebook and he was data mining. He was going and gathering people's information off of Facebook. And then he would go on these platforms at these big churches and he would pretend to have a gift of prophecy by telling people things about themselves that they're like, well, how would he possibly know that unless God told him? Well, he's getting it from Facebook. So he's getting invited to all of these big platforms. He's making money. He's selling all these books, putting himself out as a prophet. And he finally got caught. They confronted him, and he just basically went quiet. Like, there was no public apology, there's no public repentance. And I remember reading this passage and thinking about that guy and thinking, there's a guy who has no fear of God. Like, he has no fear of the God that he's mocking. That's a good way to put it. And no care for the sheep that he's abusing. He's living as a functional atheist, quite frankly, because he's standing up there taking God's name in vain while he's abusing the people of God. And according to what Jesus says, you do not want to be that guy. There are serious consequences for treating the people of God that way, and Jesus won't let that go unpunished. So, shepherds who abuse the sheep and think they're getting away with it, they're in for a rude awakening. The fear of God, it's important, and these things are deadly serious. Okay, now what does Jesus add to that in verses 47 and 48?
He's stressing accountability as far as what people have been given. So the servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows.
Mm-hmm. So with knowledge comes accountability. To know what the master wants and disregard it. You deserve a greater punishment. Why? Because it's not just that you did something you shouldn't have, it's that you disrespected the master in the process. I mean, disobedience is one thing when you don't actually know what the command is. But it's another thing when you know the command and purposely do the opposite. There's a difference between breaking the law because you're ignorant and breaking the law because you're rebellious. Both of those things deserve to be punished, but one deserves a greater punishment than the other. Go
And
ahead.
it's interesting that secularly, they agree with that when you said they both deserve to be punished, because in all of our world as well, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
That's right.
If you break the law, you can still be punished,
That's right.
even if you didn't know it was a law.
Mm-hmm. All those people from Colorado who unknowingly bring marijuana into Wyoming. They're still breaking the law, right? Or the speed limit changed and you didn't know it. If you get pulled over, you're still responsible for speeding. But it's one thing to be speeding and not know it. You're still breaking the law, but it's another thing to see the change in the speed limit and to be like, that doesn't apply to me, I'm going to do what I want. Now, the law in that case might not have a different penalty, but the law of God says there is a heavier accountability that comes with knowing God's will and rejecting it or rebelling against it or just disregarding it because of what you're saying about who God is, what you're saying about the lawgiver himself. So knowledge and responsibility are a privilege, and to abuse that privilege is an offense against God. And Jesus adds that from everyone who's been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who's been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. The willful misuse of God's gifts is something that he does not ignore. We saw this actually back in Leviticus. I don't know if you remember when we were looking at the sacrifices that there were certain offenses where the leaders of the people had to offer a more valuable sacrifice than the lay people did because of the effect of their sin and because they were held to a higher standard of accountability. You see the same thing in the pastoral epistles when Paul lays out the requirements for elders, right? I mean, that there's a standard that's different if you're in a position of leadership because of the impact that you have on everybody else. I mean, think about that even within a church. The sin of a layperson and the sin of a leader, they might be the same sin, but they can have an outsized impact if you're somebody who has influence over a lot of other people. So the privilege of leadership brings with it accountability. And that didn't start with Paul. Even Jesus has to say there is a higher standard for people who have that responsibility. Okay, now what does Jesus say about his mission in verses 49 and 50?
He came to bring fire on the earth, but he has a baptism to undergo first.
Yes. So the preceding verses have emphasized being watchful and faithful in light of the fact that Jesus will one day return, and at his second coming there will be accountability and judgment. So these verses continue that idea, but now with the inclusion of both future and present judgment. The present judgment's coming in a minute. But Jesus starts by saying he's come to bring fire to the earth, and he wishes that it were already kindled. What does that mean? Well, fire, of course, is a metaphor for judgment that shows up all over Scripture. And we actually saw this earlier in the preaching of John the Baptist. So Jesus' statement right here, it echoes what John has already said about him. In other words, Jesus has come to bring judgment on the world, and he wishes that the judgment were already started. Now, why would Jesus say that? Why would he want that? Well, here's the thing. What does divine judgment do for us? It cleanses.
Separates the sheep from the goats.
That's right. So you hear about judgment, and it sounds a bit scary, because it is. But divine judgment is what purifies the world of evil and sin and death. And actually, it's only the judgment of God that can do that. Without the judgment of God, there will be no cleansing, renewal, or freedom for God's people. So that image of fire, it's somehow helpful because fire is destructive, but at the same time, fire can purge things that nothing else can. And that's the idea, is the divine judgment of God will purge and purify things that nothing else can. And that's a good thing for God's people. There's no salvation for us without the removal of evil from creation. And there's no removal of evil without God's judgment. So then, why isn't there fire accompanying his first coming? Because he has a baptism yet to undergo, and he's governed or constrained by that. What do you think he's talking about when he says he has a baptism to undergo?
Death and resurrection.
Yeah, the crucifixion that's coming up. It's his suffering and his death that's this baptism. So before Jesus brings divine judgment on the earth, he himself must undergo divine judgment on behalf of his people. Okay, now let me just give you an illustration right here. I've used this illustration multiple times, so some of you are going to be like, I've heard this before, but I like it, so I'm going to use it again. So back in like the 1800s, out on the in the plain states, where there's just grassland for miles and miles and miles. One of the big dangers for them, I mean it is for us today too, but one of the big dangers for them was wildfires. Because you could have a wildfire start somewhere in the west and then it would blow to the east. And because there was so much open grassland, the fires would just get bigger and bigger until they would be miles across, and they're just sweeping across the plains. Now, if you're in a tiny town out there in the middle of, Nebraska or Kansas, and you don't have a fast car, I mean, you got a horse and a wagon, there's this big wildfire coming, what do? How could you possibly get away from it because it's too big to actually escape it? So what they would do is they would send people on horseback to the towns that were ahead of this fire, and they would warn them that the fire was coming. And so the people of the town, if they knew that fire was coming, they would go outside of town and they would light a fire. And they would burn out a big spot outside of town. They get rid of all the grass, and then when the wildfire arrived, they would go outside of town with their families, their animals. I don't know, maybe they dragged their furniture out. I don't know what they did, but they took whatever they could take, and they would stand in that burned out spot so that when the wildfire came by, it would sweep past them, but it wouldn't destroy them because they're standing in a place that's already been consumed. It's the only way they could survive those kinds of massive wildfires. Now, that's what Jesus is talking about right here. Jesus is our burned out spot. Here's Jesus saying, the judgment of God is coming, and it's coming like a fire, and it's going to purify everything. How is it that we survive the purification that's coming from the judgment of God? It's not because we're all that. It's because Jesus dies in our place. He takes the judgment that we deserve, so that when the judgment of God comes, we stand in union with Christ as our burned out spot. And the judgment of God goes by us without destroying us because it's already destroyed Jesus in our place. So here's Jesus saying that judgment's not coming until he's undergone the judgment that we deserve. His death has to happen before the judgment of God purifies the world. So judgment from that perspective, it's not a surprising consequence of Jesus' ministry, and it doesn't contradict his mission. It's actually integral to it, because everything Jesus is about is ultimately the purification and renewal of the world. Okay, now in verse 51, Jesus then moves on to a judgment closer to home that's happening even now. So what does he add in 51 to 53?
He came to bring division on earth, not peace.
Now that's interesting, given the proclamation of the angels when he was born, right?
Peace on earth.
And then the fact that his baptism it communicated a very peaceful, non-threatening inbreaking of God's kingdom. Why does Jesus say that? What's the kind of division that he's causing right here?
Well, there'll be people that get his message, but there'll be a lot that won't.
That's right. So the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the world are going to collide in the person of Jesus, right? Even though the fiery judgment of God is waiting for a later time, judgment has already begun in the sense that Jesus himself divides and the message he proclaims divides. Indecision does not divide, but decision does, and there's the rub, is that Jesus will not let you stay on the fence. He forces a fork in the road where people have to decide one way or the other. And that decision results in distinctions and separation. Jesus isn't declaring war on the world, but he's disturbing the peace because it's not possible to be neutral about him. And if that's the case, division shouldn't be unexpected. And how does he describe that division in 52 and 53?
It's family member against family member.
That's right. He's not talking about divisions between nations and cultures and races and classes, but between people within the same family. It's the kind of division it's as personal and as intimate as it can get. So it's parents against children, children against parents, people in the same household taking sides against each other. Obviously, physical families and spiritual families are not always the same. And Jesus requires an allegiance that supersedes even your biological family. It's just like Simeon prophesied to Mary back at the beginning when he said the Messiah would cause the rising and falling of many in Israel, and he would be a sign to be spoken against who would reveal people's hearts. John the Baptist also said he would separate the wheat from the chaff. So all that to say, there's a division that naturally follows in Jesus' wake, and it is in itself a form of judgment. And the thing is, that might get personal for Jesus' followers. They might get disowned by their families and excommunicated from the synagogues and excluded from their own communities. There's no sugarcoating anything right here, and it's not just them. Does this happen in our day too? I mean, we know that there's persecution that goes on against people in closed countries where people convert from certain religions to Christianity. But I expect probably a lot of you have felt this rub as well. If you have unbelievers in your family, this is something that can be very difficult. But here's Jesus just laying it out. Allegiance to him it's the highest priority there is for someone who chooses to follow him. One of the writers I read said, love for Jesus might mean that you will lose the people you love the most. Coming to Jesus might only be the beginning of your problems. I don't think that's typically how we do evangelism. Telling people it's going to cost. But it does. There's a cost to following Jesus. Who is he that he has the right to demand your highest allegiance? He's God. Nobody else could do that, right? Nobody else could legitimately require that kind of loyalty from you. But your Creator can, and Jesus does.
I remember as a teenager, we had a speaker at church, and he talked about coming from where he was to becoming a Christian, and his family had a funeral for him. I mean, they like cut him off, had a funeral for him, he was dead.
Yeah.
And the idea, because I was a Christian at the time, the idea of being able to say, to step away and walk away from everybody you loved.
Yeah.
That's a lot more trial than we ever go through.
Yes. Yeah. And you could look around and think, I don't know if it's worth it. But Jesus is telling you it is. Because who do you get instead?
God.
You get God, right? You get God. And Jesus is going to address this a bit later too with his disciples when they say, we've left everything to follow you, and Jesus says, you're going to get it back in spades. Don't worry about that. The blessings will be worth it, but there may be a high cost to pay in this lifetime. Okay, now what does Jesus then say to the crowd? He's been talking a lot to the disciples lately, but then he turns to the crowd in 54 to 56, and what does he say?
You can interpret the weather, but you can't interpret what's right in front of you being said to you.
That's right. They're reasonably competent at weather predictions. We are too, right? Clouds gather in the west, and everyone knows it's going to rain. The wind blows from the south. Everyone knows it's going to get hot. The people are good at interpreting the atmosphere, but they're failing miserably at interpreting the spiritual conditions. Why? Is it because there's no hint of what's going on?
No, it's their hearts.
Yeah, it's they're hypocrites. He says it right there in the middle. Like the religious leaders, they're hypocrites who won't think out the implications of the evidence that's right in front of them. They're continually seeking signs from Jesus, despite the fact that he's doing signs all the time. The present time has given them an overabundance of signs that clearly demonstrate he's the king of the ancient prophecies. He's the Messiah sent by God to deliver his people. He is the Lord in the flesh. So why won't they acknowledge the truth that's right in front of them? It's not because there's not enough information. It's because their pride gets in the way of them really thinking out what it is that they're seeing. And then, what does he add? The little parable, what does he add in 57 to 59?
going along with your adversary, the magistrate, you should reconcile rather than face the judge and maybe be put into prison
Mhm.
and pay your fine.
That's right. So, what's he getting at? Is this good financial advice, or is he going after something else right here?
Isn't he going after our efforts to be at peace with one another and even at peace with our enemies without being jerks?
I think there's that, and I think there's also being at peace with God. I think he's putting the people on the spot right here to think about making the most of the opportunity that they have to repent and to trust in Jesus before they face the final judge. Like, this opportunity is not going to be open to them forever. They're looking at the weather conditions and ignoring the signs that would tell them judgment's coming. So Jesus says, use some common sense. Take the opportunity that you have to turn to God before judgment arrives. Don't, that picture is really great, that idea of, okay, you're headed for a lawsuit. Wouldn't it be better to try to settle out of court? Because you don't know what the outcome is going to be if you stand there before the judge. Well, here's Jesus saying, you know what, get the outcome sorted before you stand in front of him, and the way you do that is by reconciling with him before you get there. And how do you do that? By repenting. Like, turn from your sin, put your faith in Jesus, be reconciled to your judge before the day that you see him. So here are these people who they're kind of on the Jesus bandwagon. He's traveling around and they're following him and they're seeing the spectacles, they're watching the miracles, everybody's impressed. And Jesus just keeps telling them over and over and over, the time is limited. The point of all of this is it's not a dog and pony show. Like, there are eternal, important things going on right here, and that opportunity they have is not going to be there forever. They need to get serious about really thinking through what they're seeing, working out the implication of who Jesus is, listening to his teaching and taking it to heart. Not just showing up, watching the miracles, oohing and ahhing over Jesus, and then going back to doing what they were doing before. The warnings are serious, but Jesus is constantly inviting them, okay, come in, be reconciled, turn from your sin, put your faith in the Son. Okay, how is any of that relevant to us?
It's scary to think that we have enough knowledge that we're going to be judged more harshly.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be ready, always, not just, well, I don't know, but we just need to be
Not
ready.
just on
always.
Sunday morning.
Yeah, not just, yeah.
How do you do that when you're just, kind of going about everyday life? I mean, you've got dishes to wash and a house to clean and kids to look after and a job to do. And how do you be alert and awake and ready in the middle of all of that?
Keeping your sight set on the kingdom above and just growing in grace and attending studies in the Word and just staying focused on that like he tells us to do, and not on the things of the world, not our stuff or even people. Just living in that ultimate reality space every day.
Which sounds easy, but it's not, right?
No.
It's not.
You
It's
get
a challenge.
distracted.
You do.
Well, he's our ultimate comfort and security. I mean, for me, he's a refuge and he's always there. Because I'm alone, but I'm not alone. Like Doris, our friend who passed away, I would tell her, Mom, we're never alone, We have God's book to read and, and it comforts us. So.
And there's value, I think, in being with other believers too.
Right.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's the people around you who remind you.
The challenge is being with non-believers. That's the challenge for me.
And knowing that if you have unbelievers in your family, like I do, it's hard because you know where your future is, and you want them to know that so that they have the same goal. You want them to have what you have. You want them to have that peace and that joy and knowing that He's our comforter and knowing that He's there with us through the hard times and the good times and through our valleys. And you want them to have that. And they just don't get it. When,
Choose not to get it sometimes.
yeah. When this incident with the preacher in Riverton,